Hallelujah. He's King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Getting a little background feed, Benny. Monday we're on Christian Nation. This next Monday is going to be an interesting session, as you'll see if you come on. And if you're like really millions of people, not even just Christians, that are shocked at what's happening in our country, we've got not only show the problem, but we've got solution. That's the neat thing about God. He doesn't just say you're a sinner. He says, look, I can remove your sin. God has solution for everything. Individual issues, national issues. God has solution. Monday. Tuesday, it's on New Testament Church, pillar and support of the truth. In the New Testament Church, we're laying out so many things that are so different and sometimes contrary to what the traditional church is. The traditional church unwittingly is repressive and repressing the advancement of the kingdom of God. I'll let you make that decision. You listen to the verses that we'll share and you see if that isn't true with the traditional church unwittingly. Though I know many dear pastors and parishioners and all love the Lord and all, but don't be so arrogant to think that just because you love the Lord that you know everything or I know everything. But we go to the Word. If the Word says it, that settles it. That's our manual. That's our book. And it's divine. It's eternal. It's good for every day, every generation, and every nation. Okay, marriage. We finished up the marriage series, even though the live part of it is over. If you're a husband, if you're a wife, and you've not seen that, you might enjoy that. A lot have found that really profitable. We've never found a couple that didn't have success, great success and pleasure in their marriage if they followed the 10 directives for the husband and the 10 directives for the wife. Boy, if they're both following them, their marriage is dynamite, not only with one another and their children and their family, but an impact that they make on the world. Anyhow, you can go back and get that whole series on Wednesday. If you look at every Wednesday broadcast, also have the book. That series is written in the book called The Husband, a real original title, The Husband, God's 10 Directives, and then one for the wife, a separate book called The Wife, God's 10 Directives. And you can order those on jimsbookstore.com. That's my bookstore where all the books are. If you go into jimsbookstore.com, you just click on disciples or disciple church, and you'll see them in that category. And then on Thursday, today, it's my life. And we've got Rup Chen here again. We were finishing up on what's going on in Ames, Iowa, when we took over the Iowa State Daily newspaper. It was literally a revolution that was going on in Ames. We'll get to that in just a minute. But on Friday, our questions, any question you want to ask, if you've been on the topics we've been on politics, church, marriage, your life, my life. On Friday, we answer any and all questions. So you can put your questions in there. Sometimes we answer them at the end of the show each day. So even today, we may answer questions that you have relevant to what we share at the end of the show. But if not, on Friday. So anyhow, we're going to pick up where we left off. And Rup, who was talking with us, was in Guyana on last week when we were with him. And he's in Guyana again this week. He married a gal from Venezuela. And if you know anything about Venezuela, it's just it's a mess. The communists have made it go from bad to worse. Venezuela used to be one of the richest countries in the world. And it doesn't take too many years before the communists destroy a country in every way. They try to be like the nanny state, and that's really an understatement. They try to control everything. God's civil law, in God's civil law, it's basically just two things: to praise those that do good and to punish those that do evil. They don't social welfare programs and so many entitlement programs, so-called, are not a part of God's civil law. He lets people keep more of their money. In his law, there is a tax, but it's only 10%, and that's it, no more. And it's not, and other things aren't taxed. It's personal income. So when we buy a loaf of bread, for example, we have, somebody figured it up, I think almost 100 taxes on that loaf of bread, from the farmer to the real estate to the crop to the tractor to just a slew of things. Getting it to the stores, there's layers of tax that you don't always see. That's why the prices are so high. And God has a whole different system of running a country. And boy, if you follow it, it's incredible. America got started that way, especially in the colonial days, and it flourished and was so strong. And even after the American Revolution, they kept a lot of God's law in place, but not entirely. In fact, some of the founders, Samuel Adams, Patrick Henry, were very upset with the Constitution and the new structure because they felt it left God out of the picture far too much. They saw that it should not be the supreme people, authority should not be the people, but should be God, and it should be written right in the Constitution, as it was in all of the state constitutions, which is very interesting. So anyhow, I want to pick up where we left off, but we were trying to get Roopchen online here. Like I said, he's still in Guyana. It came through pretty good before, but I'm assuming we're...
Roop will be on in just a few moments here, Jim. It'll be like a minute or two.
Okay. Okay. I don't know if you guys heard my producer, but he said Roop would be on in about a minute or two. They're having to work some technical difficulties out. Guyana is a small country just north of Venezuela, or excuse me, just north of Brazil and just south of Venezuela. And his wife came from Venezuela, got from Venezuela into Guyana, where Roopchen originally was. And Roopchen, just to let you know, if you didn't hear his testimony or part of it last week, he was one of the leaders of the communist youth group in Guyana when he came to Iowa State University, where our team, where I and our little group came up, sang, preached, and saw hundreds of people raised up, students. We had, in fact, the largest student organization that the university, to my knowledge, had ever had, with hundreds of us. And all the students were radical for Christ and zealous. And anyhow, Roopchen was up there, and Ev Sherrington, dear brother, going on strong for the Lord today. Anyhow, they were in the Memorial Union, and they were sharing the gospel with different students, sitting down with them, and Roop was one of them. They sat down with him, and I think one of them thought, oh, this fellow's not going to be very open. But long story short, after they shared the gospel, he received Jesus into his life and became born again, was baptized, a part of our fellowship, and began to grow in the Lord. And he looked like a little Castro. He had a big beard. He wore fatigues, and he was a communist, and an out-and-out communist. And so when he got saved, he didn't particularly change his wardrobe too much. I don't think he shaved his beard for I don't know when, but so anyhow, he was able to get on the publication board that puts out the Iowa State Daily, and it had an enormous budget. I can't remember the amount now, maybe $500,000 or something, which back in the 70s, that was a lot of money to put out a student newspaper, a daily paper. But it was very influential, obviously, in the campus, but even outside of the campus. And we strategized and to get more of our people, Christians, in our group on the board. And Roop was really the key person for that. I worked with some of the guys that came on. He definitely did. And one by one, we got control of the board. And once we got control of the board, then again, long story short, you could listen to last week, you'd hear it is really, it's both humorous and shocking and amazing. But the faculty advisor, who was basically a Marxist himself, he got so upset at one point once he knew the Christians took over that he quit, and then he tried to come back, and they didn't let him come back. So the Holy War was beginning. There's different things that happen that as soon as we get Roop on, I'll interact with Roop on it together. So anyhow, this is just my testimony, my life. And you know, your testimony, guys, is the most powerful thing that you've got. And learn to share your testimony. Nobody, they can talk evolution until they're blue in the face. They can talk and deny creation if they want to, or whatever scientific subject the left gets involved in, they can try to refute it, but they can't refute a changed life. And learn how to share, whether, in a sense, I share my testimony when I give out a tract and maybe just in passing to somebody, and it's a one sentence testimony. Jesus just changed my life. That's powerful. Jesus changed my life. And if you have 2 or 3 sentences, you can add more to it, whatever God puts in your heart. Or you can give a 5-minute testimony, an hour testimony, and I'm going over weeks in testimony as I look back on what God did, miraculous things. And you've got them in your life as well. You need to realize that there are miracles that are going on in your life, and you can see more happen as you obey God, as you get in the Word of God, and as you just determine to obey God. That's the bottom line. You see, the Bible's not just intended to be a book of information. It's an action book, and it's an exciting life. It's a daring life. It's a challenging life. It's a risking life, but it's a life of meaning. They say probably most important thing with people psychologically is to have meaning and purpose in life. Nobody that commits suicide feels they have a lot of meaning or purpose. They commit suicide, one element will always be there, a lack of meaning and purpose. But even for your life to become more vibrant and abundant and powerful and filled with meaning and purpose, it comes when you begin to see you're an ambassador for Christ. You're out. You have a mission in these short days that you're here on planet Earth, and they're short compared to eternity. They're nothing. In fact, it's infinite, or it's finite. So every day to be used that way is so exciting. I've got a couple of guys that are helping us out with some things, and I'm praying for them. They don't know the Lord, but slowly been winning their friendship so that they respect and love you. You see, when you talk to a neighbor or a friend, you reach them different than when, for example, Memorial Day, we were out on the beaches and reached over 1,000 people, passing out tracts and talking to one, sharing the gospel. And if you're passing somebody that you may never see again, you may hand them a tract and they can read it and they can get saved, and you may just give a word. But when you're with a neighbor or somebody you constantly know, you might not immediately hit them over the head with the Bible. They have opportunity to get to know you, and so you can win them. And of course, to have your life have that meaning every day is just fantastic. Anyhow, I think we got Roop coming online, and we're going to pick up where we left off. There he is. Hey, Vinny. And Vinny, you come online too, brother. We'd like to have you on. You might have some interesting input. You feel free, Vinny, whatever you want. Anyhow, there you are, my brother. Can we hear you? Or we had audio problem?
I can hear you.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
I can. It's a long ways away. You're in Guyana still, and I gave a little brief on how you were trying to get your wife out from Venezuela to Guyana to the United States. How's that coming? Are you making progress, brother?
Yes. The only thing is left is to get a passport for my grandbaby. Everything is closed down in Venezuela. So
really,
but with God, all things are possible.
Boy, that's for sure. Is it closed down because are they using the coronavirus excuse to close everything down?
It's a combination of political and coronavirus.
Is there a political election coming up or something to that effect that's affecting it, or is it just a political within the context of coronavirus?
There's so many people leaving Venezuela, they don't have enough paper to make passports.
Oh, but I thought it was related to Guyana, but you're saying Vienna. Or
Guyana. There's no U.S. embassy in Venezuela, so they had to come to Guyana, my home country.
I see, Guyana. Yeah, no, I know Venezuela. They were using newspaper for toilet paper, and yeah, even killing. They were killing some of the animals in the zoo to get food to eat. It's tragic. I mean, the communists. You got to hand it to them. They know how to destroy a country in short order, don't they?
Yes, and Venezuela has the highest oil and gas reserve in the world, and yet it's one of the poorest country right now. So it's not so much your resources, but what's the political system can do to. It's like North Korea.
Yeah, that's really true. And before the communists took over, it was one of the richest countries and greatest producing countries
Yeah.
uh, in the world, and certainly in Latin America.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, that's good. We'll keep praying that you get your get your wife out. To not have enough paper to write a passport sounds pretty dire. That's for sure.
Yeah.
You know, people in this country, and you know this, Roop, if they've not been to other countries, especially communist countries or Marxist, socialist, even maybe not outwardly communist, but very ultra socialist countries, they don't have a clue. They don't realize how demonic, oppressive, and destructive socialism really is. You
Yes.
there? Yeah. Anyhow, Roop, let's pick up where we were on the newspaper. And those that I was giving a little preview how God miraculously took over. You were the first point person to get on the board. One by one, you and others from our fellowship got on the board so that the Christians controlled the board. The faculty advisor, which basically was a Marxist socialist, he got fed up. He quit. Then he came back the next day, and y'all didn't let him back in. So then he quit. But you said one of the things that was lacking, and I want to elaborate a little bit more on this for learning, because when you look back, you see things to the glory of God, but you also see things where you learn from for the future that today even many us need to learn. And I knew what you were talking about, but I'd like you to elaborate a little bit more. Once you got control, what was the lack at that point?
Well, when we got control, we were not on the offense. It's like we were on the offense to take over the newspaper. But when we got control, it's like we thought that control was the end game, when really the control should have been the beginning of the game. So when we had the opportunity to move further and get rid of the editor and put in other Christians, and then when our cover was blown, and one of the things I've learned, Jim, is that most of the cover, all secrets or all the problems usually come from the inside, not the outside. You can deal with the people on the outside, but when your cover is blown from the inside, that creates a lot of problems. And that's the thing I've learned as a young man, that on developing political strategies or Christian strategies, that sometimes you think outsiders shouldn't would be the problem, but actually it's the insiders, because most of the time it's because of the lack of wisdom. They don't know how to deal with questions when asked, whether it's the media or other people.
Yeah, let's interact just a little bit on this, because this is a problem with a lot of Christians. Some Christians group would say, well, we need to be open. We're not, if we're not open, we're not honest. And Satan, he's a master at using even scripture and manipulating scripture and trying to even affect our own conscience and our mind. And of all people, Christians have a good conscience, and they're very sensitive about not violating their conscience. Talk just a little bit, Rube, if you might say, hey, why weren't you open? Why were you? And they would view it, hey, you were being deceitful or dishonest, working in this context. What would you say to that?
Well, here's the example of when the blind man received sight, the young man, and the Pharisees and scribes came to him and says, who made you see? How did you see? And he was smart enough to recognize the problem. He said, all I know, I was blind and now I see. He showed wisdom rather than kind of fell into the trap to point the fingers at people. in our situation, one of the professors asked one of our members who were on the board, and he thought because of honesty, he need to tell them. When all he had to say, you ask them if they're members of this Christian group, you want to know the information, you ask them. So just that lack of wisdom and just
elaborate a little bit more so people can understand. Let me just give a little bit of understanding, because this is a big, this is an important issue. This is why Christians have been obliterated in many instances. And I'm going to give a verse that Jesus identifies this with. But the point was, just to let our audience know, that there's no way Rupchen, in fact, they probably thought he was still a communist. He looked like a communist. He had a beard like Castro. We used to call you Little Castro. You probably didn't even know that, Rup, before you got saved. But they maybe even thought you were still a communist. And consequently, because they were Marxist and you answered the questions wisely, they pulled you in. Had they known you were a born-again Christian, you would have never gotten on the board, never. And they asked, and the faculty advisor especially was very keen and smart, questions to try to find out your worldview, or if you're pro-Christ or the church or this sort of thing, and you wouldn't be on the board. So you didn't lie, but you didn't let them understand everywhere you were coming from, or they wouldn't have let you on the board. I think this is right. I want to give one verse, and then you pick up on this. And I asked Benny to be able to pull this verse up, and he can put it on whenever he gets it. It's in the gospel. And when Jesus, and it's mentioned twice in the gospel, here it is the first time in Matthew 10:16, Jesus said to his disciples, before, this was part of his instruction in sending them out. In fact, this was the only thing that told them how to think. He told them what to wear, what to take as far as food or money, or where to stay, lodging, etc. So he only gave them one sentence on the strategy for what to think. He says, and this is it, behold, I'm sending you out as sheep in the midst of wolves. So be wise, be wary, or some translations say be wise or wary as serpents, and as innocent as doves. Let me just elaborate on this a little bit, Benny, and then we'll show how that you applied this verse, and how many Christians that don't have the wisdom, it's really a lack of wisdom. They're immature, they're naive, and they've generally not been in a battle. They've never fought for the kingdom of God. But notice the first word, he says, behold. In other words, you need to realize this. And I'm sending you out as sheep. I'm not sending you out as war troopers, or I'm not sending you out as lions or tigers. I'm sending you out, you're the sheep. And I've oftentimes thought, in the midst of wolves, if there is and wolves always go in packs, don't they? And they're always in a pack. We're getting feedback, Benny. I don't know if everyone can hear that, but it's certainly feedback on my ear. So anyhow, can you imagine a pack of wolves, and if you drop a sheep right in the middle of that pack of wolves, that sheep would be eaten up. It would be all over immediately once it was disclosed that he was a sheep. Once he revealed he was a sheep. And we're going in, the gates of hell will not prevail, but we're going in to where the wolves, the wicked, are in control, and pursuing the kingdom of God, to put the kingdom of God in place. And so as sheep with wolves, we're dead immediately. Immediately, it's over once they know we're wolves. So Jesus said, be as wary, or some translations say as crafty, some say as wise as serpents. And Rupchen, I've oftentimes said this, when was the last time you heard a sermon or a message on the wisdom of a serpent? Leave it up there, Benny. I want that verse to just soak in. When was the last time you heard a sermon on the wisdom of the serpent? Put it back up, brother. I want people to see this. They got this with what Rup did. Rup applied this verse, and most Christians don't think about this verse. It's the only thing that Jesus said to his disciples. Benny, put that baby up. Leave it up, and I'll tell you to take it off, brother. Wise as serpents. What's the wisdom? Here's my question to our audience, and you already know the answer, Rup. What is the wisdom of a serpent? So leave that verse up, Benny, or we're going to talk about it for just a minute here. Roop, I want you to first comment on what do you think the wisdom or the shrewdness of a serpent is? Oh, we can't hear you, Roop.
Very quietly.
Okay.
You go in very quietly.
Very quietly.
Without anyone knowing what your agenda is.
Right.
Because what I found at that time, the adversary were not called progressives or so. They were called more humanist, at least in the university, humanists.
Right.
And what I found is that they were very, very skilled in communicating. They appear so reasonable. And you would want to be for them because they sound reasonable. And as Christians, if we sound very dogmatic or fanatic, right away, we lose our audience, right away, we lose credibility. So there's wisdom in being very low key, ask questions rather than ask questions to flush out people's views rather than say what's your view is.
Very smart. Question. Very good.
Are you asking a question?
No, I said the fact that you say to ask questions is really a key factor. Not if you want to get to something, so you learn your opponent where they're coming from, their hot button or soft button. But go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt you there.
Yeah, and taking over the board of the newspaper was just one area we were working on. I need to remind the audience, we were also involved in key committees in the university, the Academic Affairs Committee. We want to make sure that we have a say in what's being taught. In the Human Relations Committee, in the Graduate College Committee, I was a member of all those committees, so I get a chance at the university level to know how they're thinking and to know how to deal with issues without them knowing what my philosophy or ideology or my Christian worldview is. So it's so important to be as innocent as doves and to be wise as serpents. Another thing is that we were very active in the classrooms, Jim, whether it's the philosophy and religion, whether it was, I was very active in the journalism, and I took journalism law just to deal with this guy, Ed Blinn, who was a faculty advisor. I would take classes just to challenge some of the folks. Some of our students were in botany classes or biology classes just to be a part of the evolution debate. Some were in engineering classes just to deal with evolution from what quantum physics point of view or material, whatever type of
the third law of thermodynamics.
That's it. So it's not like we were Christians, but we were not just in the religion classes. We were in journalism classes, we were in botany class. And that's the reason why the university was so confused, because we were in the offense. We were determining where we should fight the battles and when. And once you have that high ground, they don't know where to defend.
Yeah.
So it was not just the university newspaper. It was the entire university system. We had, in some ways, if I can use the term, infiltrated for righteousness.
Absolutely.
And in fact, I remember at one of the newspaper board meetings, a guy by the name of Patterson, a well-known evolutionist on campus. Jim, you remember that name.
Yeah.
Patterson. He came to the meeting, and he whispered. He said, "Those guys know what they're doing, or they don't know what they're doing." Well, the truth is, we knew what we were doing, or we were pretending that we didn't know what we were doing.
Right. Absolutely.
So even he was confused.
Yeah. Well, we had a strategy, Roop, you probably remember this, where we were training students in all of the different academics and how to be effective. And I remember in some of the large lecture halls where there'd be hundreds of students, 400 or 500 sometimes. What the professors will do, they'll throw out something, and if there's some Christian, they'll really mock them, and they will use the Christian to try to destroy the Christian faith. And usually they'll isolate them and then destroy them, type of thing. So what we did, if you recall, Rup Chan, and I don't know if you were in some of these, I think you probably were. In fact, you probably helped instigate some of them. We would have maybe there would only be 2 or 3 of our people that were in this big lecture hall, and so one little innocent sister or brother would raise his or her hand and say something that would be challenging. The professor, of course, would start to just attack him and start to cremate him, thinking he's by himself, like the wolf on this one little sheep. And then over on the other side, say, raise their hand, says, well, one of our people would raise their hand and say, oh, well, I agree with her because da 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 da. And then he would go over there and try to attack them. And then a third person way up in the balcony would say, well, but what about this? And so we'd have 2 or 3 of our people, and that professor, I mean, it would just drive them up the wall because they were being dishonest in the academic field. And they saw, and it made the whole, the hundreds of students like, hey, we're on the side of this guy, whoever he is over here, and the girl over there, and the guy up there. And it galvanized. And I remember in some of my classes, even before Iowa State, what I would speak, and oftentimes, not often, I was always by myself when I first got started. And I would walk out of the classroom, and afterwards students would come up around me and say, oh, I really agree with you. That's so good what you said. And it just took the boldness. And there was, like you said, there was a strategy, and sometimes even a strategy where they would sit and when they would bring things up, so that we began to refute the suppression of truth in the different academics. I don't know if you recall that.
Yeah, and also, Jim, we prepare students with talking points. If it's
absolutely, we do.
If it's a botany class or a philosophy class or a journalism class, or an engineering class, everyone had their talking points. And one of the things I've learned is that if you're debating with someone, the next time you continue that debate, you bring up different points because they will be prepared for the points you made before. So when you come up with new points, they're not prepared for that. That's a principle I've learned. You get the adversary off balance. You never come up with the same points or debate points that you did before.
And furthermore, I was going to say, furthermore, we would train the students to know what the professors, their typical responses would be, to be prepared to know how to counter that.
And the thing is, Jim, is that most of the audience it's like Elijah challenged the prophet of Baal. You get a big group of people just listening on, and who basically don't have an agenda. And whether it's the humanists or the progressives, when they speak, is just a small group of people.
That's right.
But the majority are like sheep, they keep quiet. So when on the other side you get very intelligent conservatives or Christians can articulate the message in a very presentable manner, it actually shocked your adversaries. But and also please the majority who are just sitting on the fence. So it's like it's like it's like you can take over the world just with a few people because the rest would follow.
You're absolutely right. They're all like sheep without a shepherd.
Yep. So so those are the principles.
Let me interject here for just a minute on this verse before we go off this verse. Then we'll pick up where we were at. You talked about the wisdom, or some translations say the shrewdness, or the craftiness, and some translations just say the wisdom of a serpent. And as I said, most people will never hear a message on this because they're not attacking the kingdom of darkness. And yet this is the only verse that Jesus gave, both in Matthew and in Luke, as to how to have a winning strategy. And you might say, well, it's deceptive. Well, it's not lying. It's just not being stupid, exposing things that you don't have to expose. For example, when Jesus went to his brothers back at home in Nazareth, they were not believers. They were against him. In fact, they said he was out of his mind in Mark chapter 3. And they said, oh, are you going to go to Jerusalem now? And it was time, not the last Passover, but one of the feasts prior to the Passover feast. And he knew, even with his own brothers, it would not be wise to reveal to them that he was going there because he might be put to death. They would pass the word. They were against him. They were in opposition, as you see, especially in Mark 3. So so Jesus, he said, and I can't quote exactly, but he says something about it's not his time, but you always have opportunity. In essence, Jesus misled his brothers there, where they didn't assume he was going to go to Jerusalem. But later you see Jesus actually did go to Jerusalem, but he didn't let his brothers know ahead of time, which I think is very interesting. In other words, he provided even an example of this in that particular context. But, if I was given a sermon on the wisdom of the serpent, I grew up in Texas. There's a lot of rattlesnakes, a lot of serpents there. In fact, I remember walking on the pipeline with my dad out in the prairies one time, and he said, "Watch out for snakes." And there was one that about struck my dad. I saw him first, threw my arm back, and maybe saved his life because I was a little kid looking out for snakes all the time. But the three things about a snake or a serpent that has wisdom, what is it? And you named one of them. One of them, they're quiet. They don't roar. They don't bark. They make zero noise. They just slither through the grass. They're very quiet. So they don't announce themselves. The second is they're very invisible. They're not up on fours or like a giraffe or most other animals. They're quiet and they're virtually invisible as they're right flush with the ground. So you don't hear them, you don't see them. Those are two areas of wisdom. So as a Christian, you don't want to hear us exposing our mission when we're with wolves. And you don't want to be seen as that when you're with wolves. The third point, though, is very interesting that I see about the wisdom of the snake. The snake will never expose itself until you get close enough for him to strike. And in other words, you want the rattlesnakes, you'll hear the rattle. They don't do that until you get close to them. If you get close enough for them to strike, then they'll hit you. Then they'll rise up and hit you. And so we may expose ourselves at a certain point, but not until you can kill the enemy. Not until you know you're within striking range for victory. Because at some point you need to expose yourself. The wisdom of the snake is he doesn't expose himself until he can literally clamp his claws around you and have control. So I see those are the three wisdoms of a serpent. They're silent. They're not visible until they can strike and grab a hold of you and get control of you. So I just want to throw that out because honestly, this is such and the biggest problem is Christians are not fighting the fight. And so they don't realize you have to have wisdom when you're fighting an enemy. If you're just kind of being passive, you don't need that verse. But if you're being aggressive, and that's the last point I want to make is, Lieutenant, you're so right. We were then aggressive on the university campuses, and on Iowa State in particular when we were there. And we weren't being defensive.
we were taking the offense, so much so that they were always on the defense. That's the biggest thing, as I see today in the news with the conservatives or Christians or anybody with our worldview. It's always the defense. It's always, oh, we want to stop the transsexual doing this or stop that. It's always negative instead of asserting our moral position. Like John the Baptist went to Herod, the top civil leader, and said, you're violating God's law, and took the offense. Anyhow, I want to pick back up and pick up where you left off. Let's say, well, okay, Benny put up another nice verse. We'll read it. This is good, Benny. Thanks, brother. In Luke 16:8, and his master complimented the unrighteous manager because he had acted shrewdly. For the sons of this age are more shrewd in relation to their own kind than the sons of men. How true that is. In fact, another verse Jesus gave, he said, the children of this world are wiser than the children of light. The children of this world are wiser than the children of light. Every one of the children of darkness, every one of the children in this world, they have an agenda, especially if they're out doing anything. They all have an agenda, but they never reveal it. One quick side note, Walter Cronkite, when I was younger, he was trusted by everybody in the world as the #1 broadcaster. And he seemed so objective. He seemed almost like a Christian. And everybody felt he was so honest and so objective. Compared to many of the news people today, he was. But he wasn't nearly what people realized. They didn't have counter media to expose how dishonest he was. I met him on an elevator in the 20th floor of a high-rise when we were at the Democratic Convention, preaching and giving out tracts many years ago when he was still a broadcaster. And God providentially put us on the top floor, and somehow the doors kept open and it kept going down and no one got on. So we had about 3 or 4 minutes together. And I just prayed, God, use me with this most influential man in the world. And I can't remember how I started it, but I somehow got in quickly about, because we had some pleasant talk, and he was very friendly, very nice, very warm. And I said, Walter Cronkite, I've had something in my own life not too long ago that just made all the difference in my life. He said, oh, what's that? And I said, it's not religion, it's not church, but I came to know Jesus Christ in a personal way. And Rup Chen, honestly, it was like a ton of bricks hit him. He flushed. He just turned white. It scared me. I almost fell back in the elevator. I was just shocked. He was just turned stone case ice, and he didn't say anything. And I stood there, and so I continued to talk. It was like a dead man came out. Demonic, and I don't have any question but he was filled with demons. He was influencing the world in unrighteousness and humanism, as you say. But it was so interesting how the whole world never saw that. I got to see that in the elevator by myself. He had an agenda. In fact, when he retired from CBS, you know what he went into? He went into promoting evolution almost exclusively in the denial of God. So we need to realize we're in a battle. These guys, they're not innocent. They're out to destroy. Like Jesus said, the thief comes to kill, steal, and destroy. They're doing demolition, and we're with the Antichrist, and there are many Antichrists. He says those that are against Christ. Anyhow, I want to pick up where we were because I think this is important. You said we took control. Once we took control, it's like we weren't prepared to effectively control things. Explain that a little bit more, and I think one of the things you go into relates to staffing the newspaper and even the editor-in-chief. Pick it up from there, Ruth.
Well, the important thing is to have a good bench, because while we were effective on the board, we basically didn't have what I would say credible, qualified people with students within the newspaper. So that would be one area I think should be worked on when students want to take effective control of a newspaper. It's not only the management, but also the people who are working. So we were in the situation of basically have to choose between sometime what we think would be better than, the better of two evils rather than good or bad. So I would say that would be an area. The second area is sometime when you're in a battle, you can get weary. And I know many members of the board were getting weary with the battle. And we need to be prepared to strengthen ourselves spiritually in prayer and why we are doing what we are doing. Because it would sound great that we took over the board, but that was not the ultimate goal. We need not only to know how to fight battle and to build convictions, but also to, I think, had we been strong spiritually, we would have done more and we would become more aggressive. So the enemy obviously fought back and we became defensive because we were not, we didn't strengthen ourselves. I'm looking back and that's what I saw, including myself. So, but one of the things at the same time I want to tell the audience that motivate me was biblical. They were my biblical mentors. Jim, besides yourself, they were Nehemiah, Joseph, Daniel, Mordecai, Esther. And one of the struggles I had at that time is, how can a guy of an international background be effective in public policy in America? Until I saw that God did that with Esther, Mordecai, Daniel, Nehemiah, Joseph. So I had a string of examples. So I was with great conviction when I was doing, because I wanted the Lord to use me to influence America, to influence the university. And I felt that right now our failure in America is that we give up the university, or are not as effective like before. So I would say that our students at the university needs to develop strong convictions. I know a lot of the folks wanted to get me deported, or they want to get me, if I use the term, fired from the university as a student, get rid. And I was not afraid of any of those. And when a person is not, well, I always tell people, fear the person who is not afraid of death. So you have to have so strong convictions that the ultimate penalty that the enemy might want to exhort on you, you're not afraid of, then they become afraid of you.
Yes.
So Jim, one of the things I've learned from you during that time, and you were also a young man at that time too, is that you said, Roop, you may not realize this, but what you're learning now, God will use in the future. And that's exactly what happened. I always reflect on that wisdom. I'm thinking, wait a minute, Jim was just about 10 years older than me. How did he have wisdom at early 30s or whatever, and I was struck by that you had that wisdom to see in the future that whatever situation we are in right now is just God's plan for us to be effective in the future. And to be effective in the future, you cannot make the same mistakes that you've made before. And one of the things I've implemented, and this is not necessary for this broadcast, in the future in my different situations when I work in Washington, is to be on the offense. Because once you're in the defense, it's only a matter of time before they chase you into the sea. So you always want to be offense and choose your battles and choose where you'll fight, when and how. And the enemy won't even know where you're coming from. The second thing I've learned is the importance of building a coalition or team. you're not a one-man soldier. And if you have a team that are dedicated, no one can stop you. So that's another principle I've learned. Be on the offense, work as a team, and build deep convictions in what you're doing. Because of what I've discovered, one of your greatest enemies as a Christian, I found out, it's not the non-believers. It's actually the lukewarm Christians.
Yes.
You think because they're Christian, they will agree with you. They are fearful. They don't want you to rock the boat. So those are the principles I've learned at a young age at the university. And those are the principles you learn in life, no matter what career or whatever you're in, and in life. In fact, the verses I've learned from the Bible are the verses I've learned at the university level through our Christian group that we are meeting with. And even today, as I deal with different situations, with God, all things are possible.
Amen.
I'll pursue my enemies and overtake them. I will not shatter I'll shatter them and they'll not be able to rise. Blessed be the Lord because he has heard the voice of my supplication. I remember anytime I have to deal with a problem with the university or whatever issue, I would thank the Lord before.
Amen.
And so that foundation, it's not only political, but it's spiritual as well. And I would say that it's amazing how living as a New Testament Christian, living as a person who is sold out for the Lord and want to not only be transformed personally and internally, but to help transform the lives of people through evangelism and the gospel. And also for those who have the gift, and I say gift because not everyone can, let's say, be in the political arena because God may not give them the passion to do it, but they may have passion for business. And basically, corporate America, for example, is a bastion of humanism as well. The universities, the arts, the financial industry. It's not just one area, and it's the same battle, the same fight, and it's the same principles.
Yeah, Rupchen, this has been so good. I thought we were just going to have one program, one show with you, but this has been so interesting, and really the lessons that we learned at Iowa State University in all the different facets we were doing. One thing is well, I won't go into this, but what I wanted to do in this program, but we just ran out of time again, is I wanted to look at the final mistake where things unwound, and we need to learn. I'd like you to detail that for us, and then show how even though that happened, through learning that, what God did in really raising some things up that later were even much bigger. And it's a cycle. We're learning, and it's a staircase, isn't it? And if you'll join us next week, I'd like you to join us one more time, brother. I know you have a busy schedule, but I'd like you to join us one more time. So you share really what happened when we begin to lose Iowa State daily, and how the ACLU and other groups. There's a lot of things that happened. The President Park, some things I think you know about, some things you might not even know about. But to let them know that sequence, because that affected an awful lot, even in my own life, and what we did after that. So can you join us next week for to show the final process of this, brother?
Okay.
Okay, brother. Hey, love you, Roop. Keep pressing.
Okay,
we'll pray
thank
for
you.
We'll keep praying that you get your wife get her passport and get back here into the States and continue the battle.
Yeah. But I want to say, though, that we are talking with the battles our relationship with Christ, that anchor and rock, is the foundation to deal with any of life's situations or battles. And sometimes we talk with the political area. I want to stress that, for me, Jesus is my rock, and I want my strength, my comfort, my refuge, my all in all. So I want to make sure that the audience realize that it's not like that we are not overbalancing our lives. That has to be a rock.
Yes.
And then everything works from then, because then you're yielding to God's will for your life. And when He leads you, when you're in the center of God's plan in your life, there is no fear.
That's right. Thank you, my brother. Yes, Jesus is the Alpha and Omega. He's the beginning and the end. He's the all in all. He is the King of Kings. He's the Lord of Lords. He's the Good Shepherd. He is the Great Shepherd. He is the Chief Shepherd. And he is why we're doing what we're doing. He is why we are what we are. And he said to occupy until I come. So, Benny, we're going to have to close off here now. And thank Roop again for all he's done and being with us in his interviews. And we're going to pick up next week where we left off. There's some really interesting things. It seems tragic. It's kind of like when they crucified him. They were weeping. It seemed like it was the end of the day. But as it turned out, it was really the beginning of the day. And some of the things we learned already that we've shared, God used in Roop's life and hundreds of others, literally thousands actually, in reaching tens of thousands, millions of people literally all over the world from those core men and women that were there. And Roop is just one strategic example of that. So next Thursday, we're going to show how things began to be dismantled. And that was heart-wrenching, what happened and why it happened. And then what finally happened after that. Because this is really, in some ways, just the beginning of the story. The battle was raging, and it didn't stop. In some ways, it got more fire after that. So we'll see you tomorrow with your questions, and we love you guys. Let people know about these broadcasts. Hit the like button or whatever you do on that, the alert or follow whatever, so that you can it'll come on when we start the broadcast. You'll be alerted. But it's every day at 4 p.m. Eastern time, and we're covering. God instituted 3 institutions: the state, the family, and the church. God ordained all of those. The majority of the scripture is actually written on the state. Only about 15% is on the church. And most Christians don't have a clue how to be involved even in the element of the state. So that we talk about that on Monday. But tomorrow it's your questions. You may have questions about what we've gone over. You may have thoughts. You can even come on. We let people come on impromptu even. We just want to facilitate. One brother one time said to me when I was a young kid, he said, "Look, Jim," he said, "I'm just like a straw. I'm just a channel. And that's all we want to be. We want to be a channel of the voice of God. Whoever speaks, let him speak as it were the utterances of God." It's not my message. It's the message of Jesus, the resurrection of life. I close off with this one verse. When I was in Mount Vernon, I saw the cemetery of George Washington. Very interesting what was written above his grave. And what he had written there was this one verse. And it was what Jesus said: "I am the resurrection and the life. He that believes in me, though he were dead, yet shall he live. And whoever lives and believes in me shall never die." My body, this tent, may evaporate, but the life is in the spirit, and they'll never die. We go from light to light, from life to even more abundant life. I will never die. How exciting, gang. Love you. See you tomorrow, 4 p.m. Eastern time, with your questions. God bless you.